Hi, this is Scott Sustacek, your host for CEO to CEO, the podcast from the CEO Roundtable. CEO Roundtable is a peer-to-peer organization that brings business leaders together to share wisdom, experience, and insights from the trenches. Today's episode is sponsored by IntroWorks, launching powerful B2B brands for more than 30 years. Learn more about them at intro.works. Welcome to this episode of CEO to CEO. And today I've got a guest that I'm very excited to learn more about, the CEO of Summit Orthopedics. And we are here today to talk with Adam Berry. Adam, welcome.
Great. Glad to be here.
This is going to be, I think, a really interesting conversation because I've titled this Fast Growth and Fast Decisions in the Ortho Arms Race. And
Very apt.
And for those of us that are getting treatment at orthopedic facilities, I think as we drive around town, we are seeing them pop up all over the place. You are at the forefront of that. And I think that this is going to be a really interesting conversation for our listeners to learn more about what's involved in competing in this fast growth marketplace.
Yeah, and even though we didn't have the conversation ahead of time, I think your title is very apropos. We talk a lot about that in terms of the hyper-competitive nature that is the world of orthopedics right now. So we live it every day, so we think it's very fast-paced and exciting. But to the outside viewer, I'm curious to see how they're going to take this away.
Sure. Well, I want to talk a little bit about you. So born and raised in Minnesota.
Yes.
We somehow let you get away, though, to North Dakota to go get your pre-med degree. Masters of Healthcare and Administration. You came back home to Minnesota, Ski-U-Ma, right? Started your career with Alina. Came to Summit Ortho in 2010. So it's been a long run here.
It has.
Long and highly successful.
Yes.
Your wife, your kids live nearby in Afton. And trail running, hiking, and anything with kids. Sounds like a typical dad.
Yes. The schedule is filled with all kinds of dad activities and husband activities, but 14 years at Summit Orthopedics has been a great run. But when you look back at a lot of things in your life, you're thankful for a lot of the things that at the moment, you didn't appreciate them, but now that you look back on it, and when you have just given those probably 5 or 6 bullet points of the last 40 years of my life, it's a lot to look back on and summarize, but you did it well.
Yeah, that's probably a really quick summary of 40 years. So now you're making me feel bad that we didn't spend more time on it. Adam, tell us a little bit about Summit and what's going on here, because this is a really interesting story.
Great. Well, happy to do that. And again, thanks for having me on. Summit Orthopedics is a name that maybe you've heard, but many times you haven't unless you've come across an orthopedic injury. So we are a group of orthopedic surgeons. We have 35 owners. So when you look at the ownership group, there's 35 individual surgeons that own the company. And they not only own it and are on the board, but they actually are working in the company every single day. And we think that's really important because they give really great patient care, but then they also have to make the decisions for how do you create a culture. So we have in total 1,150 employees. We have 22 different locations that we are at in terms of Summit Orthopedics across the greater metropolitan Twin Cities area. And we also do some outreach to western Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, a few other areas that are outside the metropolitan area, but 22 different locations. What many people may know us for is some of our locations that are right off the interstate. That's been part of our strategy, and maybe we'll get into it later.
High visibility, right?
Yes, it's all about high visibility and traffic along the interstate and retail areas. And that's been a big transformation since I first got to Summit. When I got here in 2010, everyone was building on hospital campuses. They always thought it's about proximity to the hospital, and that's where you need to be. And we shifted the landscape and said, no, let's think about the retail. Let's think about visibility and traffic in that direct-to-consumer type of a environment. So we did that. And so people may have seen our locations in Vadnais Heights right off of 35E and 694, or down in Eagan off of 35E and 494. And a few others around town have some of our big hub locations. And then we do spoke locations, which are smaller in nature and sometimes a little bit more in the communities so that they don't have the same level of visibility, but they're more in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a variety of those. We have in total 60 physicians in the group. So 35 of them are owners and about 60 total that are in the group. And it's been a great group. And one of the things that we talk a lot about internally is our culture. We love our culture and what we're trying to grow from a patient-oriented, mission-driven company that has fun what they're doing, but it's also still a very fast-paced and hardworking environment.
Hmm. And I think that would be another great topic someday that to come back to. But the owners and that you have working in the company, as well as the non-owners, and how that all that transition works
Yeah.
over time. So that we can peel that onion though a different day. What really struck me is in our initial conversation, Adam, you talked about the demographics that are really driving the growth and change in not only in Summit, but within the industry as a whole. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when we look at our demographics and our patient population, there's a few different areas that we spike up in the population, and I'll talk about them each of them a little bit differently. So the first one is going to be your 14 to 20-year-old. So you sometimes get those youth sports, high school athletics, the playground and jungle gym fractures that happen. So you get a lot of those that are going to be in that younger generation, and the decision maker is really the parent. So that's who you're kind of marketing to, and that's who's going to drive that healthcare decision. Then you're going to have what we call the weekend warrior type group. Because I'm 47 years old, I fall into this
You're right in
category,
there.
and
You and I both.
yes, and so you're not quite as active as you used to be in your youth, and you go out and play pickleball, and maybe you have an injury, and everything starts to fall apart from there. But it's going to be that spike up that really it's that 35 to 55-year-old that's having some of those injuries. Maybe they're working a little too hard in the backyard over the weekend, and then their back hurts Monday morning. Then the last segment that we have in the third population is really the 55 plus, and you start getting into the arthritis, you start getting into the total joint replacement. And I would say one common misperception that people have is when they see orthopedics, they think it's only those people that need joint replacement. And when we look at it, yes, certainly that's one of our big population spikes that happens, but it's also much younger individuals. And actually, right now, the fastest growing segment of people who need a joint replacement is 55 to 64. So it's that population before Medicare age.
Right.
You're starting to see that happen much more often, that people don't want to live with the pain. They want to be able to do the activities that excite them and bring them joy in life. So we are seeing a much younger population getting that total joint replacement. So those are kind of the three major areas. But then I would talk about just another segment of our business that many people don't know about, and we call it our industrial athlete. So that is going to be the Minnesota occupational health business that we have. So it's got actually a separate name, a different brand logo, and it's more of a business to business type of a transaction. So we have 3,300 employers that we work with. So this can be your manufacturing company, your construction company, could be an industrial area, and they need things like a Department of Transportation driver to come in and get their physical. They need a pre-employment physical for somebody who's going to be lifting a lot. Somebody has a worksite injury, and so we do a lot with workplaces around their employees and making sure that their industrial athletes are at their peak performance. And so that's another segment of our business that sometimes doesn't have the same notoriety, but it's all owned by the same company.
Do you co-locate those two different
So
entities, or do they have separate facilities?
that's a great question. So we've dabbled with that. We did it for a little while with one of our locations up in Blaine. And what we found is they're very different populations. They're not going through insurance. You a lot of times have truck drivers, construction workers. You have very different, just in general, different demographics and different entrances that they need and different facilities. So we've actually moved away from the physical co-location and tried to be much more distinct and unique with having them be standalone facilities and locations. So the one that we had up in Blaine with our Summit Orthopedics venue, we just separated those out, and we've given the Minnesota Occupational Health their own site and their own location. That's worked out a lot better for flow, for culture, for a lot of different reasons.
So interesting, just from the customer's mindset of the kind of facility they want to walk into for the service they're getting, whether it's getting their back repaired or taking a test to get employed. That's a really unique look at it.
Yeah. And think about it even from if one of your listeners thought about it when they go to their family practice doctor. They're going to have a very different environment than if they go
Right.
to a general surgeon versus if they come to an orthopedist. Within the world of orthopedics, it is very much of a hyper competitive environment, and it's also very retail, direct to consumer. So we're catering to that individual that really wants to come straight to the specialist, doesn't want to have to navigate through 2 or 3 other appointments before coming to us. So we make things very inviting, from the aesthetics, the lighting, the way we greet you, and everything else. When we design those locations, they're a very different design than we might have with other types of medical specialties that are out there.
Interesting. I think I want to go a little bit further now into this arms race and how Summit competes, because you're in a very intense market, for lack of a better term, and there's a lot happening. So, how do you differentiate?
We do. And as a leadership team, we talk about it literally every single day. And how do you make good decisions? Because what we've observed is that there is a saturation that's starting to hit the market. So we are conscious of that. And we have to look at it and say, where is it that we can make investments that are going to pay off for us and are going to be beneficial to the patient, but doesn't contribute to the problem of overconcentration and oversaturation? So we've had to look at, how do we actually play a different game? So we talk about it constantly in terms of making sure that we don't necessarily fall into the same trap that a lot of other groups do. So if you see what a lot of our listeners are probably going to have seen, is a Tree Orthopedics or a Twin Cities Orthopedics, whether that's at the Minnesota Vikings or the Minnesota Wild, they're going to see them with the professional sports teams. We've deliberately not gotten into the professional sports teams, or really even the collegiate sports teams, because those can be very expensive, time consuming endeavors to do sponsorships at those levels. And we think that we're going to be better served by focusing on the families and the patients that are your average everyday Joes. So we have tried to stay away from some of those types of things where we make investments. Secondly, when we look at our population, it's also that Minnesota occupational health is a big draw for us, that none of our other competitors have an occupational health program.
Hmm.
And also, what we've found is that when you look at employee injuries for these different companies, roughly 80% of all their injuries are musculoskeletal related. So when they have that type of an injury, an accident, or follow up that's needed, the Minnesota Occupational Health can send them right over to the Summit Orthopedics. So it's another
Hmm.
venue for us to have from a referral standpoint.
Oh, sure.
So we do that. And then the last big one that many listeners are probably going to be familiar with is the orthopedic urgent care landscape. So when I came to the Summit family in 2010, there really were not orthopedic urgent cares across the market. What you saw was people going to emergency rooms, or they were going to your family practice urgent cares. And so they were used to that type of a venue. And so at first, what you saw in the market was the orthopedic groups come up with different names. So we had Ortho Quick. Twin Cities Orthopedics had Access Clinics. Tree Orthopedic called it their walk-in care. So everybody was trying to find their niche and trying to get to that consumer to educate them on, there's a different outlet for you, that you don't have to go wait in an emergency room. You don't have to pay more money at these expensive facilities. Now, as time has gone on, we've all changed our naming, and now we all call it orthopedic urgent care. So now all our competitors and us, we all call it the same thing, and it's much more around, how do you have just that access point for patients out there, because they're now an educated consumer about coming directly to an urgent care rather than having to go to these other venues.
So now it's become a standard product, so to speak, in the industry. They're looking at that urgent care saying, okay, I go to urgent care if I have a cold, cough, whatever. Now I go to an ortho urgent care. And
Yep.
it kind of just becomes part of their mind share.
Yeah, and it's that micro segmentation that's happened over time.
Hmm.
It used to be an ER or your family practice doctors where you went for all your healthcare needs. Now you're seeing these micro segmentations that are out there, certainly in the world of orthopedics, but also in other specialties as well.
Well, I know having kids that grew up playing sports, we're in orthopedic urgent care is probably too often. But
Yeah.
but again, when you need the health care, it's nice to have that access.
Yeah, the common joke that we make is, we need to get a punch card program. 10 broken bones, get the 11th
Right.
one free, kind of a thing, because when you have kids or you're the caretaker for family members, you can be in here a lot.
Now, one of the other things that we talked about in our previous conversation that our listeners would really enjoy learning more about is, because you guys have to go through pretty extensive location and what I call bricks and mortar justification for your facilities. And again, because you're in this arms race and you're trying to find locations that work, you're trying to find a customer niche that isn't served potentially by a competitor. So, walk us through how you here at Summit think about that and what your team thinks about.
Yeah. So we're doing this on a regular basis. We have 2 times a year, we do an offsite retreat with our board and our leadership team, and we're always evaluating what's going to be on the future horizon from that real estate standpoint. And so we've had a couple of key themes that probably emerge out of them. Is one, we've done a lot of work around traffic studies, understanding where the traffic patterns are and where the flows are. So you look at a lot of our facilities, they're going to be in those high traffic corridors along the interstates, as we kind of talked about earlier. Secondly, we've had to look at where is there demographics that are going to be needing our services.
Hmm.
So the primary example is going to be down in Lakeville. In the last 2 years, we've opened up our new facility down in Lakeville. And when you look at where there's the housing starts, we've looked at everything from housing starts to where schools are being built. Those are the indicators that say there's going to be that population that's going to need those healthcare services. And then third, it's also about where is there the gaps in the market, especially as people are learning how to go directly to a specialist instead of going to their primary care physician. We want to find out maybe there's a strong primary care population that is used to going to a distinct area, but now they just don't have the specialty services.
Hmm.
So whether that's Lakeville or Blaine or otherwise, we've been doing those. And so when we do the business case justification for it, we also have to look at what are the services that are inside of that bricks and mortar, because when you look at our business, there's a couple of distinct services. The first one is going to be your physician office visit. So when you suspect that maybe you're having a shoulder problem, you're going to want to come and see a doctor and try and get some type of a diagnosis. So that's going to be your traditional clinic visit. Patients are probably, and listeners are very familiar with that. But then if there's an injury and there's something that needs to be rehabbed, then you're going to go to a physical therapist or a hand therapist. And so we have to have those services also co-located on site. Also, sometimes in the evaluation, maybe you need an MRI scan or a CT scan being done. So we also have those strategically located within some of our facilities. Again, those are our hubs where you can have all these services under one roof. And so think about it from the top of the funnel. A lot of patients are going to come in and think that there's something wrong, but then the funnel is going to narrow it down. Not everybody needs physical therapy. Not everybody needs an MRI. So that funnel gets narrower and narrower and narrower. Then you also look at it, and the most narrow point of the tunnel of that funnel is going to be who needs surgery. So we actually have ambulatory surgery centers for that really small segment of the population that's going to require the surgical intervention. So that can either be done at a hospital or it can be done in our outpatient facilities. And an outpatient ambulatory surgery center is going to get patients discharged the same day. They're going to have that experience where you're really going to be pain free during the day of the operation. You're going to go home and you're going to try and get mobile and active as quick as possible rather than staying multiple nights in a hospital.
Yeah, it's kind of that. I don't want to oversimplify it, but one-stop shopping of where you're going to one provider and you're getting the care you need, you're getting the rehabilitation that you need, and if that doesn't work, obviously then it's on to surgery or something else, and then rehabilitation after surgery.
Yeah.
So,
So the way that we defined it back in the early 2010s was we wanted to create a musculoskeletal healthcare system. We
mm,
want to deal with everything from the one-stop shop component of it. So back in 2012, when we first had that vision and concept, we could not be a hospital. And today, still today, there's a moratorium. You can't build new hospitals without getting approval from the state. So we have built everything except for a hospital bed. When we build out our hub facilities, it's literally everything except a hospital bed. And so back in 2012, when we were putting these together, the big component was total joint replacement. All of those were being done in a hospital at that point in time. And when I first got here, the average length of stay was about 2.5 to 3 days. So a patient would go to the hospital, they'd be in there for 2.5 to 3 days before they could be discharged and go back home. So we wanted to revolutionize it. And what we did was create something called a care suite. So we have the surgery facility on site. It's an outpatient facility. You're going to be there, you're going to have your surgery, and within 3 hours, we want to discharge you over to what's called a care suite, which basically looks like a hotel room. It's a
mhm,
glorified hotel room. We cater in food service from the local businesses, and you can have the patient spend the night there. So it's a way that we're not a hospital, but we can keep patients overnight. And now everyone is discharged within 1 day. So we took what used to be in a hospital, 2.5 to 3 days. And when you're in a hospital, there's infections, there's confusion, there's campus logistics of moving around and parking. Whereas at our facilities in a retail area, parking's right there. You can get very convenient access and location, and you're getting discharged the same or next day. So we've really tried to revolutionize that experience for somebody with those significant surgical procedures.
okay. I'd like to shift gears a little bit now and talk about your experience with the CEO Roundtable. So, how long have you been a member, Adam?
So I became a member right around 2013. So
Okay.
probably 11 years right now. And it's been a great experience. And we've had some long serving members on our table, but also brought in new talent. And it's always fun.
Nice to have both, right? The consistency, but yet new ideas and new businesses that not only can you learn but learn from.
That's the important part of it. You got to have both.
If you could, for our listeners, talk about the biggest decision that your roundtable has helped you with.
Yeah, there's been a lot of them, and I'd maybe highlight two of them if we have enough time to talk about both. So,
Sure.
one of them on the business side, back in 2017, our organization was going through significant upheaval. There was a lot of things going on. We had just completed two different mergers in the course of 12 months. We were building a new facility. We were really revolutionizing the company in a lot of different ways. And now, in hindsight, you could look back on it and very clearly articulate the problems. But when you were in the moment, you couldn't understand all of the problems and everything coming at
The
you.
fog of war, right?
That's a great expression. And I was in the fog of war. We had things where some of our physicians that we had merged with, had gotten overpaid 3 to 6 months worth of compensation, and we had to claw that back. That's not a fun endeavor to
No.
undertake. The building that we were erecting was over budget, and we were now having to deal with some gaps in how are you going to pay for that. That's not fun. You had to go through a lot of different upheaval inside the company, and we found a lot of mistakes that were being made by the finance team without some of our knowledge. So I had to rely on the group to really help me see through that fog of war. And it was great because they gave me the perspective around where do you have to position your time? How do you take care of the business, but also take care of yourself on a personal level when there's a lot of stress in a very condensed period of time? And so I think they helped me to get the advice and the counsel that I needed to move from what I'd call level one leader to being a next level leader.
Hmm.
I had been at that point in time CEO for about 3.5, 4 years. And so then when I came on the other side of that event, I now think of myself as a next level leader rather than a beginner CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And that maturation process was, I think, squarely because of the counsel, advice, and direction that the CEO roundtable members really gave to me.
That's a fantastic story with your growth as the outcome of that in the role you're in and helped you get where you are today.
And now when you look back on it, you see why there's so many quotes about the fact that you only grow through those difficult and challenging times.
Right.
And that anxiety provoking moments back in 2017 really helped emerge a greater leader from myself, but I think also others in the roundtable. When I look at the experience that they've had and how they've emerged as leaders, it's through those difficult moments in
Right.
time.
Oh, and you said you had a second one
Yeah,
too.
so the second one was on a personal nature. So my son during COVID was in high school, and those were trying and difficult times. Now that I'm on the other side of it, and my son is 20 and in a different spot, we're in a better place. But when I look back on it at the time, he was going through some mental health issues. He was going through some behavioral issues, and not having a good relationship between my wife and I and our at the time 16-year-old son. Those were just very, very difficult moments. And there was some really great advice Joe, one of my members, gave to me. When you look at the executives, we'll spend a lot of money building up our biceps, spend a lot of money with a personal trainer to make our
Right.
biceps bigger. But why don't we spend the money and the time making our minds sharper? And going through a mental health event with somebody, why not invest the time and the money to get the specialist and to get the expertise that you need rather than allowing the stigma of mental health to overcome you and prevent you from getting what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the advice and the push that I needed to get over my own insecurity about having a son with maybe seeing a psychologist
Mm-hmm.
and trying to get those services. And so it's sometimes the hit you upside the head type of moments from the roundtable members that make you open your eyes.
Well, both of those are fantastic stories, and I think obviously the one being more business, but the personal one, that's invaluable, right? To take you and your family to a different place.
Yeah.
So,
And I try and use that advice now with people even outside of the roundtable. And that's the great part about the lessons you get from the roundtable groups is you want to be able to cascade it out to many other people in your organization, in your family sphere, and otherwise. So the life lessons that you get out of the roundtable are just imperative.
Yeah.
And what I tell people constantly is you get out of the roundtable what you put into it. You have to be willing to be authentic and vulnerable and willing to share your experiences, because if you contribute and put in, then you're going to get out more in return.
Yeah. So that was very well said. And I think we've said it on this show before, because that is the essence of that peer group sharing. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying it.
Yeah.
Now we're going to have a little bit of fun and just talk about 3 questions that will let our podcast listeners learn a little bit more about you. So what's
Okay.
your favorite movie?
Well, this will show generationally where I'm at. So growing up, it was my favorite movie, and probably to this day it still is. And it's the old Top Gun movie. I
Got
feel
it.
the need for speed. So yes, Top Gun.
And that was the first movie really coming out of COVID too, where we were back in the theaters, wasn't it?
Yes, my wife and I absolutely made a point of seeing that one in the movie theaters as soon as it came out with Maverick. But yes, so Top Gun is the favorite movie.
All right.
You can laugh or you can cry, depending on how you feel about that answer.
What are you reading now?
I'm an individual that has a few different books going at a time. I have an audiobook usually for all the time that I'm in the car, and then also a physical book. So I'm in between books right now. So I just finished up for the audiobook Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne.
Yeah.
A little bit of a throwback to many days ago. And then on the physical book side, I got the Andre Agassi book called Open, which actually was really good. Generationally, Andre Agassi was the thing when I was a kid, so certainly hearing his reflections on life right now were inquisitive and good to hear. So I'm now on to my next ones, and if listeners have ideas, I'd certainly love to know a good book, but I think I'm going to go to another old one, which is Catcher in the Rye. Never read that before, so I'll try that one for the physical read book.
I like your run through the classics.
I started doing that about 5 years ago, and it's a great thing to just go back to some of them. I never read them growing up, but I'm trying to now.
And so then our last question is, what's your bucket list concert?
Well, I almost feel compelled to make this statement because of the roundtable event that we had a couple of years ago. One of our retreats, we were driving down the road, going out to dinner, and a song came on the radio, and everybody else kind of freaked out and thought it was the greatest song. And they said, "Oh, we all love Jim Croce." And I said, "Who's Jim Croce? I don't know who he is." And that really showed my age and genre at that point in time. So I feel like I should say Jim Croce, but unfortunately I'm not going to. So instead I'm going to say probably U2 somewhere in Europe. I would love to go over to Europe and see U2 in concert.
Wembley Stadium maybe, right?
Yes, that would be the penultimate.
Wow. All right. Well, Adam, this has been fantastic. So I really appreciate you being a guest, being so open with us and talking about Summit, and the things you're doing here, as well as you personally and how you're learning and growing every day in this role. So
great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Scott. And as I like to say here, have a Summit Day. We have the multiple play on words with the concept of Summit. So thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you for listening to the CEO to CEO podcast, produced by Dave Swerdlick and the incredible team at Uptown Podcast Studios. You can find them at uptownpodcast.com. Be certain to subscribe so you don't miss an episode with more CEO wisdom highlighting experience and insights from the trenches. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review and share with others. If you are a Minnesota-based business leader who would like to learn more about being part of a peer advisory roundtable, check us out at ceo-roundtable.org.